Good. So it's very nice to be here in Brisbane. What a beautiful city. Wonderful people. Wonderful weather. Really, really nice. And a great conference as well here at the International Data Week. And we're in this SciDataCom meeting. My name is Francis Crawley. I live in a place called Leuven in Belgium, and I am a member of the International Data Policy Committee for the Committee on Data, Co-Data of the International Science Council, which, as you know, is co-organizing the International Data Week with the Research Data Alliance. So here we are in a session that I put together originally with Caitlin Corrigan and Alexander Kriebitz, who are both from the Technical University of Munich, and also with Dr. Elif, who is also a member of the International Data Policy Committee. Elif can't be with us, either online or in person, and Caitlin and Alexander were not able to get funding to make the journey or even to be online, but they have sent an online presentation. And I'm very pleased to say that I don't know how to call him, my mentor, my teacher, my brother, Dr. Sciamo, who was originally, he's here on behalf of the African Open Science Platform, which is run by the National Research Foundation in South Africa. He is an expert in data, but Dr. Sciamo is primarily a farmer. And that's his secret, but that's his strength as well. Anyway, Dr. Sciamo will start this off with a discussion here from the African Open Science Platform's point of view. But I hope that then we'll have the presentation from Drs. Caitlin and Alexander, which will be a recorded presentation. So apologies for that, but it's a very good presentation, and I'll introduce it when we get there. And then you'll have to suffer through a presentation from me as well. But mostly, I hope that we can have a good conversation as we go along. So I would suggest that we pause after each of the presentation things, the PowerPoint things, and we try to have a human discussion, because we're all used to seeing PowerPoints on Zoom 4 or 5 times a day, 6 or 7 days a week. And I think the real advantage with the International Data Week is that we are here together and that we can converse together and discuss what's important here too. I just want to say the instigation behind this really comes from Drs. Corrigan and Kriebitz, who wrote a very interesting paper on AI and human rights. I thought it was a profound paper, actually, profoundly good paper. And it's more than a paper, too, and they will talk about that. But I thought it was important for us to think about human rights and what human rights and AI mean within this context. So it's a context, if you want, of ethics, but it's also, and even more so, a context of the legal environment. But I think we're really fortunate to have Dr. Sciamo here, who will first introduce this, I believe, within an open science framework, and that will help us situate it, and then we can try to go more deeply into, let's say, the ethical and the legal nuts and bolts of it, and see what that means for us in a global context. So let us see here. Good. So, Dr. Sciamo, please.
Thank you very much. I don't think any of you believe that I'm the mentor of Francis. It's possibly the other way around. who was at the IDW 2018 in Botswana? Anyone? There's one. Two. It's coming back to South Africa in 2027. When Francis invited me to come and engage, I said to him, I'm not a legal expert, nor am I a human rights expert. He knows this. I will not resist the opportunity to come and engage, because I think everyone can talk about elements of what is being discussed today. But I also wanted to wear a hat where I can come and sell a little bit of AUSP in terms of what we are trying to do in the continent to advance open science. And of course, some of the points that I would raise, I hope, Francis, they can stimulate conversations, like you said. Because I remember in 2018 at the IDW in Botswana, in Africa, in the margins of that conference, the care principles were coined on a piece of paper, 2018. So I was very excited yesterday when I had the panel talking about the care principles. And I was wondering how much progress, colleagues, we've made since then in terms of concretizing them through realistic projects, engaging the stakeholders in the relevant areas to make sure that we progress. And I think it's an opportunity also in areas like this today, in Brisbane, maybe to reflect 2 years from now in Cape Town at IDW 2027 and see how much progress we're making and how we can make incremental progress towards these areas. So colleagues, I'm very, very excited. I'm highlighting policy there in terms of what we do as AOSP, because I think the issue of data sovereignty can be situated in policy. And it's one of the things that we're very excited to try to influence in the continent and beyond. Very nice. This is the nicest graphic I have of AOSP and what we're trying to do. And I want you to look at it and think about maybe how you can engage with us in any of these areas, because I think these are critical areas for every continent. And certainly for us in Africa, we think they are key. And again, I'm highlighting policy there as an area that I want to situate this talk on. In terms of what we do, Francis mentioned fragmentation, a fragmented world. There's a lot of fragmentation in what we do. So ASP is very, very keen in the continent to drive alignments. And we also want to identify critical gaps and design and deliver together, which is why we are very keen to be part of these conversations at IDW 2025 and going forward. I wish I had 1 hour to do a keynote, but I want to highlight those key areas where we are operating. Again, because I mentioned policy, it's critical to always engage policymakers. I'm a scientist, but I had to buy a suit. And I spent 2 years of my very valuable academic time seconded to government. 2 years. And in that time, I learned a lot. The policymakers and us sometimes are miles apart. We need people who could be conduits between these two communities. One of the things that I'm excited to talk about is the work that we do with policymakers at the regional level and at the continental level in Africa. I'm highlighting the work that we did to engage the Southern African Development Community ministers to come up with decisions on how they, as a regional bloc, can advance open science in as much as they have agreed as member states to endorse the recommendations of open science. You'll see there that we had to motivate, first of all, what they themselves agreed what open science is. Remember, you have to continuously educate the politicians on what they've already agreed themselves. And you'll see some very nice things that came out that needs to be done. And again, this happened because we put ourselves in a position to engage and influence them. So there are some tasks for ASP and UNESCO and the SADC Secretariat, for example, to develop a regional framework and guidelines on open science. And I think this is key. have a conversation with a number of countries at once who themselves are aligned on a particular set of things to move together. Francis asked me to talk about this. And here's some of the things that I think you may have to think about. It's a balancing act, isn't it? Data sovereignty and human rights. And of course, it's multidisciplinary. I confess that I'm neither of those specialized skill sets, and I don't have any of those skill sets: legal, political, ethical, and technological. There's also some natural tensions when you talk about human rights and data sovereignty. You see them there. Economic opportunity versus individual rights, corporate versus state control. We know about the data with multinational companies, and we know about their tendency when dealing with our data across borders. Again, that's an area we need to think about, these tensions. Of course, we need to think about the definitions. We have to pin down what these definitions are in terms of what data sovereignty is. And the underlying drivers. We should not bury our heads in the sand. We cannot talk about data sovereignty without thinking about the things that are driving it, not least some of those that are listed there. You'll agree that all of them are very relevant when we talk about data sovereignty. I put geopolitical concerns there at the bottom. I was cringing when I was listening to the discussion about the sale of, I think, TikTok, and the underlying conversations that are emanating from those discussions. Colleagues, I'm putting those there to maybe ground some of the discussions. There are some positive impacts of data sovereignty regarding human rights. It's not an exhaustive list, but I'm sure this is the discussion that we can have in this group today and think about, even though we are not experts, some of us, what are the things that are positive regarding when we talk about data sovereignty vis-a-vis the human rights? And then, of course, the negative impacts. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. You can discuss this today. Of course, there are some guiding principles and framework that can help us. We know some of them. I mentioned there the indigenous data sovereignty frameworks, very key. And I think we haven't done enough, frankly, if you ask me, which is why I appreciated Hilary's question at the panel. And I think it's something that we can think about. And of course, there are some opportunities through looking at open data and rights protections. Francis, I think you said 10 minutes, I'll try to quicken up. Africa is huge. I always shudder when somebody says, what can we do with Africa? Huge. That's the scale of that site. And this compounds, obviously, the problems, challenges, but also opportunities. This other part shows the different blocks. I mentioned the Southern African countries. There they are, where we did some work in terms of policy influence. The idea is if you can have these conversations at the regional level, and these are replicable conversations, you eat an elephant one bite at a time, isn't it? We're most likely to succeed if we can have these conversations. Africa itself wants to integrate, not as a monolith, but there's an ambition to be able to integrate over a number of dimensions. Again, exercising those regional blocks, which is a good thing. So these conversations could be had continentally. There are some very exciting instruments of policy. Just this year alone, 2 of these instruments have been approved by the African Union. Embedding open science in the STISA strategy. Therein, there's an element to accelerate the transition to open science in the continent, which is exciting. And then, of course, the AU AI strategy that encapsulates what Africa thinks of AI, bottom up. I just want to highlight that the issues of AI governance are there. They are there, critical. Again, talking about digital sovereignty, there is the digital transformation strategy of Africa. It does talk about the need for digital governance. Of course, there's still a lot of way to go regarding implementation of these things. There's also the AU data policy and governance that provides some framework. Again, these are key instruments that have been put into place to capture African thinking and desire around some of these issues. Colleagues, there's also been some conversation around access to data in the continent. Again, related maybe to human rights, there's a resolution that attempts to promote access to data. And as the open science community in the continent, we engaged with the rapporteurs regarding maybe providing some inputs in developing some of the guidelines and answering some of the questions that need to be answered vis-a-vis what needs to be done regarding those guidelines. And these are conversations that are critical. Maybe very finally, in terms of the things to provoke some thinking, what are the practical navigation strategies that maybe we can think about today, here in Brisbane and beyond, regarding what each of those stakeholders could do? It is something that we could think about and we provide recommendations. I like the very last point there about strengthening multilateral forums, because you talk about fragmentation, Francis. How can we strengthen these multilateral forums? We know that it's very challenging with the geopolitics. And I wanted maybe to spend 2 minutes talking about the work that was done by the South African G20 presidency. As you know, the AU is a member of the G20, which is exciting in as much as the EU is a member of the G20. And the presidency rotates, and 2025, South Africa was the presidency. And of course, each presidency comes up with themes. You'll see there are solidarity, equity, and sustainability were key. There were many working groups. There was a specific working group on AI, data governance, and innovation for sustainable development, which obviously had a number of objectives. I'm excited to say that there was a launch of the AI for Africa initiative at that forum that drew on the strategies and policies that I talked about. Last slide, Francis. AI also needs to help us address societal challenges in as much as data, in as much as digital technologies. The G20 under the South African presidency in the Research and Innovation Working Group wanted to galvanize the G20 to work around a use case that is non-controversial, that is impactful, that can also tease out some of these things we are discussing today, especially access to data to solve societal challenges. And this was very, very critical. Again, remember equity, solidarity, and sustainability. We are talking about marginalized communities that settle on the fringes of very big cities, in areas that are not well planned out. Floods come, sweeps them aside. What can be done regarding some of these issues that we are talking about today to help them? We're talking about AI, we're talking about data, we're talking about risk classification, we're talking about forecasting. And can we do this within a multilateral setting, engaging stakeholders and accessing cross-border data, and certainly exciting our young people about innovation? I'm very happy to say my mentor, Francis, and I worked on a G20 survey around some of these challenges. Obviously, the findings are not surprising, isn't it? Everybody's got their data. We don't have much progress made in terms of interoperability and access to these data sets. We'll share the survey at some point. Finally, these multilateral forums allow us globally to engage for these very nice outcomes. And of course, there were many, many teams participating. For us, this was a start. It wasn't an end. Within the G20 mechanism, be able to come up with a process that now and in the long term, within this particular area of disaster reduction, demonstrate that we could use multilateral platforms to engage. Could there have been any other case study or use case? Colleagues, I'll stop there. I'm not an expert, but those are some of the thoughts that I thought could stimulate your discussions. Thank you very much.
Stay here, stay here.
Oh, you stay here? Yeah. Oh, okay.
So Dr. Shyamo, thank you very much for giving us this presentation. I think this presentation really helps to situate the discussion that we want to have today about AI, about human rights, about the governance of AI, the place of it here. And by situating this within this African space, primarily, but not just African, G20 as well, space on data and how that's being thought of. So I want to depart from what you're saying. The first word I want to start with, because I think this is a word I want to carry on throughout as well, is sovereignty. Now, Dr. Shyamo and I were in Algiers for a fantastic meeting of the African Academies of Sciences earlier this year. And Dr. Shyamo gave this incredible presentation because he is the Secretary General or Executive Director of the African Open Science Platform on open science. I thought it was great. It was incredible. And it was about 40 minutes long. At the end, Dr. Shyamo got so much pushback. I've never seen it before. I didn't expect it. I know you didn't expect it. I don't think you expect it. Enormous pushback. I think he still feels it. But the question that came up was this: we're not giving away our data. We're not giving it out there, okay? So, and of course here also in Australia, we're also very much reminded of the idea of the indigenous populations and their data and how it belongs to them, how they have, let's say, a sovereignty over it and so forth, okay? So, how do you understand sovereignty? What is your thoughts when you hear the word sovereignty? What do you think about? What do you think is most important? Ownership. Thank you very much. Something else. Control. Something else. Custodianship, protection, obligation. These are all good words, yeah. Responsibility, that's also a word I was looking for, yeah. Responsibility. What else do you think of when you hear sovereignty? Maybe even outside of data, but just the word itself. What other connotations does it bring to you? Rights? Pride. Okay, pride, yeah, I can understand that. Something else? Power. Self-determination, determination, self-determination. Independence. Sorry? Territorial. Colonization, yeah. Borders. Politics. Sorry? Yes, benefits, yeah, yeah. You're going to reap a reward for something that you have sovereignty over, yeah. So, yeah. Disruption, yeah.
Attitudes and beliefs.
Sorry?
Attitudes and beliefs.
Attitudes and beliefs, yeah. So that word sovereignty is heavily, and I think all of these expressions, all of this terminology that you apply to sovereignty, I think it's heavily invested, huh? And that means the weight that data carries is really heavy. It's not simple. So the pushback that we felt when we were in Algiers is really understandable, right? These people have been coming here for so many years and taking our stuff, and now they also want our data, and they just want us to put it out there and make it open and free.
I was accused of being a UNESCO agent.
Yeah.
Bringing in things from the UN that are not even well understood and shoving them on people's mouths. So I think the conversations around domestication of these conversations is very important.
Yeah.
Having that internal discussion and owning it, and then of course expressing it in ways that reflects the realities both at a national level, regional and continental.
Yeah, so maybe if you just come up closer to this microphone, yeah.
I
Because there's people
thought I was
online.
projecting well. Now, just emphasizing
Yeah.
the need for domesticating these conversations. When I was sitting in front of ministers presenting on open science, obviously we knew that the UNESCO recommendations were endorsed by over 193 countries. They say, yeah, we're aware of those things, but are we ready as country X in Africa regarding our digital infrastructure, regarding our data? You know, of course, one can try to argue that we can actually now have technologies to visit data wherever it is, but then again, you have to have infrastructure to do that. So, you know, they're not technologies, but they are very sensitive to the strategic point that Francis was saying. And then one has to argue, or at least convince them of strategies to be able to do open science amidst all those other concerns. I mean, if country X, Francis, have determined that these data sets can be made available, they've been vetted, they're not a security threat, they're not an intellectual property threat, they've been funded by public money, why can't they be put out there? So I think we need to have these conversations with countries and policymakers vis-a-vis not necessarily opening up everything willy-nilly, but if we determine that we open stuff out, how can we make it fair and what that means and what is required to do that? Yeah.
And another conversation that Dr. Sharma has been very much involved with is this idea of data visitation. Right? So where instead of assembling data from different places in order to analyze it, instead of bringing data to code, and we could say you bring the code to the data. So the data stays in the various locations where it already is, and the code goes to it. And this is, of course, where AI comes in as well. So let's, because I don't think there's anybody in this room who's not an AI expert. In fact, I haven't met anybody in the data sciences who's not an AI expert.
I've confessed that I'm
Foremost, Natalie, who has written on AI and human rights. So this next talk is going to be for her especially. But everybody's an expert on AI. So I just want, just to clear it up and just make it, let's just get this over with, but somebody just give me a really simple definition of what AI is so we can move on. Yeah. Because we have to be able to relate now what we're going to talk about with regard to AI and human rights to this discussion that on where AI is active, the field in which AI is doing its thing on the data. So what is AI? What does AI bring to this discussion on data on our digital selves, our digital societies? It's a tool. I think we will all agree with that. But we'll come back to that. Keep that there, okay? What else is AI?
To a degree, it is loss of control. As we as humans, we give over some of the control.
So now we're coming.
Adaptable computer.
So now we're coming back to, when you say it's loss of control, we're coming back to sovereignty now too. So now we're coming back to this big threat that we felt in that big Congress hall in Algiers. Yeah.
Threats. I think it's one of the problems we have when we're discussing this, as we tend to talk about threats and risks and attacks, rather than looking at it sort of from the other side. So instead of looking at it, there are risks, yes, but rather than seeing it as malevolence and threats,
Yeah.
seeing it as opportunities and possibilities is quite possibly where we should start our conversation.
That's a very good point, I think. So benefits to the benefit of loss of control. Somebody else used that. I think you used the word benefit, or somebody else here. You used the word benefit. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I'm not at a good definition yet of what AI is. Yeah. Okay, so it's a class of technologies. Good. That helps a lot. Now, can you name that class? Sorry, AI is the name. Yeah.
Let's go with that.
Okay, okay. I think Virginia wants to say something, but she's not going to. Natalie, you have spent 3-4 years in the AI Data Visitation Working Group. You have written the definitive document on AI and human rights. What is AI?
Artificial intelligence, in my understanding and in my past work, which has been to aid computational modeling in a variety of disciplines going back almost 20 years. AI is not new. It can be machine learning, it can be large language models, but it can be many other things, including decision-making systems. It's as simple as you need it to be within computer science as a discipline, and as complex as you need it to be as a vendor. And for all of us doing scholarship in open science in an AI mitigated space, what AI means to us is how we interact with one another and each other's systems, and how we govern the way artificial intelligence tools and methods intersect our work, our livelihoods. We're all going to wear different hats in AI, right? Today we're a citizen, a patient, a developer, a deployer, employee, and employer. In all those roles, with all those hats, AI can impact us every day. Sometimes we feel like we're in control, other times we feel like the algorithm's in control. It's all true. So there we are. This is the air we're breathing. These are the systems we're using, and we need to talk to one another about how we deploy them. We need to legislate how we deploy them, and we need to do that in such a way that it doesn't slow science down or make science more siloed.
Yeah, I saw Virginia smiling, and now she's even clapping as well. Yeah, 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 yeah. And I know why, I think I know why Virginia's very happy, is because Natalie has brought it back to people, and you've talked about us and we constantly with regard to AI. Where did we start? What was your first definition, Thomas? Tool.
Maybe my definition.
Yes.
I think AI doesn't exist.
Okay, okay, okay.
These are only some tools,
Yeah,
and these tools use machine learning
yeah,
to learn some facts and connect these facts
yeah,
together.
yeah,
So it's stupid machine which know this to use these facts and connect these facts together.
yeah,
This is from my point of view because I'm a little bit old, and
yeah,
in 1984, Japan's want to do fifth generation computing,
yeah,
and to the end of 1990, they wanted to have a machine which will be like which will pass this Turing test.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Of course, now for simple facts,
yeah,
these machines like ChatGPT
Yeah.
pass
yeah, yeah.
Turing tests. But if you give a machine a complex task, these machines don't know to, how I say, to inference solution.
Yeah.
This is the problem. Today, this is stupid machine. When machines will know to inference solutions, to make from existing knowledge, new knowledge, then this will be AI. Today, I think we haven't AI. Also, these self-driving machines are only, they have maps, they have some sensors, and they react on this environment around machines.
Yeah.
This is my point of view.
Okay, yes,
So,
please, yeah, yeah, thank you.
as a social scientist, and what comes in our mind is intelligent use of data for decision support. That's all. Whatever the data we have, all the tech tools and techniques we are going for, algorithm and everything, but basically we are playing with the data and using the data intelligently through all the support system to come out with a decision.
So could we say that AI is a tool we use on data? Would that be correct? I mean, it's one tool among other tools, let's say, or one class of tools that we apply to data.
I think you need to have some sort of connection to autonomy or evolutionary evolvement of the tool itself.
Yeah.
In this, because otherwise it's actually, I feel it's not, like it becomes too broad otherwise because it.
Could we say it's an analytic tool? Could we say that? Would that be true? Mark?
It's
Yeah.
a tool that results in remark or considerations for which the author of the tool does not take responsibility.
Oh boy. And I thought, you know, this guy lives in Brussels, where the AI Act comes from, which is all about taking responsibility, you know.
It's also a buzzword.
And he's the one who used responsibility in the beginning too, yes. Yeah, he did. This is the thing that comes into space of sovereignty, right? Because whether or not it's stupid, and I think I kind of agree with you in some class of AI that it's stupid, but whether or not it's stupid, it does somehow, let's say, impose itself or infringe on our sense of autonomy, our sense of autonomous responsibility. So our sense of responsibility, our sense of, it seems like it's making decisions for us. So it seems like it has some kind of, your tool, the simple tool, appears anyway, stupid or not, to have some kind of agency.
So there needs to be an acknowledgement that any discussion of AI and sovereignty needs to acknowledge the policy decisions around sovereignty that are going to be based on great misconceptions. And that what we're talking about is AI, and we're getting it down to something that makes sense to us, that is much closer to what people are making policy decisions around data sovereignty based on.
Right. And Shyamo, that's where he got the pushback. Because it's like he's coming from UNESCO into Africa, and he's telling these people, we're making these policies decisions for you with regard to your data in your open science platform, and we're not so comfortable with that.
And it could do financial and economic and work as magic, which
Yeah.
can't. But the policy decisions may well be based on that.
Okay.
Francis, you
Yes.
also mentioned that or based on data. If you have falsified data, for example, if you put some Trump speeches inside, this tool will give you Trump opinions. And also another problem is hallucinations. If you don't have enough facts inside about some domain, for example.
So we're going to get very epistemological here, to use a big word, but yeah, we're going to get into this whole discussion of knowledge and truth. And, you know, I think AI as we know it today, whatever class we put it in, it is a certain, let's say, set of analytics for data. Maybe I'm wrong, so let's go with that. but it's completely dependent on data. So AI has no sensory, no experience of the world. So it has no sense of reality. So AI is stupid. AI can only hallucinate because the only thing that AI sees is the data, which is a representation, factual or not, true or not, but a representation of the world, but it has no access to the world, right? It has no way to see that there is really a lamp that's burning in this room. It only has the data that describes it, which you or me or somebody else or even a computer generated by itself, synthetic data, it only has that representation of the world. It doesn't have access to the world. So it has no play, it has no position with regard to truth. Yeah.
I'm gonna argue with you just for a second, Francis.
Okay.
We can have sensor networks, right? There are ways for it to sense things in our wave environment. And it also has interaction and transaction data. So it's not just the original data that it's being prompted with or given as a training base, but over time, it does get cultivated, I'll put it that way. And it learns through that cultivation what it should do more of, do less of, what is right or what is wrong. And that learning over time is another layer on top of the data. So I think if we just think of it as the original data, we're missing all these other vectors that go into how it operates.
If I can add on to that, having worked on autonomous vehicle legislation for a few years, I think AI has the capability to improve its data. So autonomous cars on the road, they
Yeah.
collect their own data,
Yeah.
post data, and make decisions.
Yeah.
So AI, I mean, if I can just relate it to the original time when computers were doing it, it's a tool, but the only difference in my understanding working with smart technologies is it makes decisions that all computers were unable to do. It can look at the data, it can clean it, it can make a decision about it. You can question whether that is actually true, that's a philosophical question the computer can never understand.
Right.
It doesn't work on philosophy level. It's just that an additional thing that it does, where it can automate a decision based on the parameters you give it.
Yep. I stand corrected by both of you. I admit that gladly. I'm always happy to be corrected by truths. And I think you're right. I think you're talking about something like foundational truths that we can establish based on certain, let's say, methodological manners of going about doing it like that. And we talk about that in AI, the foundational kind of truths that we can have there too. And then we have this idea of also a certain kind of perception of the world, certain kind of access to the world. And then, of course, we've also written a paper on sentient AI using neurons and things like that. So we're going in a strange direction, getting beyond Thomas's tools, I think. I don't know if we get beyond the stupidity, but sometimes ChatGPT does a lot better than me, I can tell you that. So, yeah. So but it is this very strange world, because we are living in this digital world, which is entirely digitalized. We need AI. We cannot do however we end up. We cannot do the analytics with simple analytics anymore. We do need this complicated artificial intelligence in order to bring as much of the knowledge together, much of the evidence that we have for the knowledge together, and come out with new insights and new understandings here. One thing. Just one more thing, and then we'll do the next discussion here. Shyama, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Francis. I just wanted to reiterate what colleagues were saying and the challenges that we had when we wanted to really push policymakers to appreciate why all this. So I think some of the colleagues mentioned this. If you look at AI and you ask yourself, who's AI? Who is developing AI today? And what does it mean in the long term, strategically? And is there a way for the the evolution of AI to be shaped by other stakeholders. Industries pouring money into AI development. Is there a way of others who are stakeholders, including governments, including obviously research institutions, to do more? And the opportunity for this closed AI that is doing mystery to be opened up. Is there opportunities to develop AI influenced by open science principles, open models? Is there also opportunities, for example, obviously we know that we can use AI to drive open science and vice versa. I think that's the point I'm mentioning here. And of course, we tell the policymakers that AI, in as much as we've discussed, relies on the data that you give it. Where are the African data sets to drive our AI and to drive the solutions that we want? So really, the value of AI is in the data that you give it, including the data sets that reflects your priorities as a country or as a continent. We need to think about those data sets. And of course, the development of AI, these are algorithms. I'm a mere computer scientist. I'm listening to you talking about these definitions. I'm quite excited. My supervisor was a philosopher, computational logic. If you talk about AI, there are some people doing symbolic AI, not necessarily dealing with data, but manipulating symbols and doing computational logic. But bottom line is, there is no mystery. These are algorithms written by people. And they also reflect our biases. So the issue of whose AI also gets us to think about maybe doing more in terms of the diversity of people developing AI. What are we doing now in the long term in terms of the skills development reflective of humanity in shaping AI? Because invariably our biases also end up in these things. And of course, all these things have got economic value, the use of AI. So we tell them, a lot of countries have done open data readiness assessments to say, as country X, what is the opportunities if we open up our data sets? Therein, what are the opportunities then to use those data sets to drive country X's developmental plan? So I think we need to have these conversations at various levels and carry everybody along to make sure that in the end we have a product that we want. Thank you, colleagues.
Some responses to what Dr. Sciamma has said.
But also the question, who controls the computational resources that are required to use this technology?
Yeah, I really liked what Sciamma said, because it's not just like this monster AI coming out of the heavens or somewhere and, you know, and landing on us. But we are the ones who are creating it. We are the ones who are, I'm going to go back to Mark's word here, responsibility for it as well, huh? And put this, how we should be shaping this, and I also thought it's important, you know, how data sets from different places in the world, from different environments in the world, from different peoples in the world, if you want, how those data sets are going to shape AI, because that is also going to shape our epistemic or knowledge environment.
So I'm really glad we're talking about this in terms of human rights and kind of environmental impacts, for lack of better terms. I think there's something very important here that I frankly don't hear enough of, which is the counterside in terms of climate impact that we have when it comes to these AI systems. Whether we're talking about compute or the storage, the strain on water systems
sounds like you deliberately put somebody between you, right?
It's like an excellent example as a autonomous vehicle. You create this amazing machine, but it has a lifespan. What do you do after 10 years, 15 years? After that machine cannot do the job, after the computer is not able to sustain the software it needs to go. What do you do with that big machine? So that's the sustainability part of it. But the other thing I was going to say is let's not, so full disclosure, I work with the government part of AIC, but I was an academic. So I think sometimes I feel like this is the same question.
You were once a good person, yeah, okay.
Yeah, we were doing CRISPR. I don't know if a lot of you know what CRISPR is, but I was a genetics person back in the day. The technology that came in, you could edit any gene. What stopped us from editing human genes? It's just ethics. And the responsibility of not doing something. You could do it. You can. Anybody can modify any gene with CRISPR, but we don't do it. Why? Because it's not ethical. So I think the question of AI is the ethical, responsible use. Like at the moment, people are talking about writing your annual reports with AI. Is AI designed for that? That's a question. It's not a question of can AI do it. It can do it, but the question becomes is it good or bad thing? The question is should it do it? Is that the purpose of AI?
So this next presentation is going to be perfect for you. I promise you. Please, Daisy.
Yes. I'm looking forward to the next presentation that will be perfect because I'm missing the element of social justice. We're busy talking, and if you are talking about Africa, there's a lot that we are looking into with regards to social justice at all levels, from access and to what the colleagues at the back are talking about. And I think that's a narrative that we try and hobnob around. Yeah.
Shama, what do you think we go to the next
I
presentation?
think we should.
Yeah,
There's a lot to talk about. I'm glad that I managed to share a few thoughts, colleagues. No, thank you very much. Francis is a philosopher. I'm out of my depth.
Let's see. Okay, this is the presentation. If I can get it to work, let me see what happens.
Good morning. My name is Alexander Kriebitz. I'm working at Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. And together with my colleague Caitlin Corrigan from the Institute of Ethics in Artificial Intelligence, we are presenting on the issue of the Munich Convention on AI, Data and Human Rights. And the purpose of our presentation is also to give you some background information about our initiative, but also the general reasoning for a UN Convention on AI with a specific focus on human rights. And the starting point for our work has been the observation that when we look at the evolution of artificial intelligence as a technology, that it presents indeed a very comprehensive challenge to human rights. And what we find is that because of the omnipresence of this technology, it constitutes, as a wider change within the age of AI, a major transformation in terms of how it changes political systems, how it ramifies in the economy, how it changes culture, how it changes human interactions, but also how it ultimately changes the way we relate to each other. And I think we see that quite particularly when we look at large language models, as well as the behavioral changes which are triggered by the use of AI. For instance, studies showing that AI also changes the way we think, but also the way we speak about ethics in particular. So this brings us in a way back to the roots of human rights and also addressing the question of what human rights are really about. And when we look into the current state of international law, we see that currently the current legal understanding of human rights is that it is a very basic concept which already pre-exists positive law, for instance, which is created by states or international organizations or the United Nations as such. So human rights are pre-existing all that, particularly the concept of human dignity plays a role here because human dignity basically says that we are inherently entitled to those rights just being human beings without any other status attached to that. Human rights, they are affirmed as universal in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which has been crafted in the 1940s. As a result of the Universal Declaration, human rights became an integral major part of international law. They have been codified in the International Bill of Human Rights. They are also part of customary and conventional international law. So this means, according to the opinion of a majority of international legal scholars, that even if states haven't ratified a human rights document, that still those norms and principles apply to them, which has also major ramifications on punitive international law and the use of international sanctions. So based on that, we see that we have a consensus that human rights are an important pillar within international law. But what we see right now is that we have a technology which is affecting so many different contexts of life, walk of life, at the same time also economic domains. We see AI becoming more relevant in the context of autonomous driving. We see it becoming more relevant in the context of medicine. We see it also becoming relevant in recruiting. The point what we are seeing here is that more and more, and as time goes by, really the influence of AI and the decision it is making, the outputs it is creating, has a significant impact on our lives, but also economic systems as such. Just think about the renting market, for instance, or the labor market. So that being said, we see that AI constitutes a challenge to human rights. And this challenge manifests basically in different ways. The first point is that AI has a dual use character, which means it can be used for good purposes, for instance, promoting sustainability, but it can also be used for bad purposes, for instance, when we look at the weaponization of the technology. Furthermore, we have significant technological risks associated with that, algorithmic bias being one of them, the opacity of those models being another concern, so which makes it difficult for individuals to understand how AI derives its conclusions. Yet at the same time, we are also seeing that there are certain inherent limitations of AI as a technology, because AI uses data to derive its judgment, but sometimes we as human beings are making decisions without using data, but rather by using our conscience or by using basically, in a way, our reasoning, which is more abstract, to derive certain judgment calls. So we are better equipped to deal with phenomena such as complicated moral decisions, but also black swans, for instance, which can come up and have a major impact on decision making. So this is also an inherent limitation we need to consider when using the technology. Apart from that, we also have highly contextual risks of AI use. Just think about the medical field, which is very complex, or neurosciences, but also the use of AI under international humanitarian law, particularly when it is used in weapon systems. Furthermore, we see also new forms of societal control as a result of a rise in data we are using in the public sphere. Think about, I would say, surveillance technologies, which are used, for instance, also in the context of online interactions. And the last point is, we see that it's not just AI as an abstract system, which is totally isolated from human beings, but we see that human and machines are interacting constantly. We see that AI also affects the way we think about decision making. It also has an impact on accountability, people pointing to machines rather themselves when a judgment has been made, which is adverse to human rights. So in that sense, we see that it is a very comprehensive challenge, which is indeed also, in a way, having impact on the underlying, I would say, pillars of human rights law. So not just specific human rights, but overarching principles such as responsibilities, proportionality, or accountability for harm. When we look at the current legal landscape, we still see that we have a dominance of consumer-centric approaches or product safety perspectives. The EU AI Act is a very important example for that, but also upcoming legislation internationally. We see that certain parts of the public sector are still under-regulated. Think about the use of AI in warfare, for instance, but also surveillance technologies. So here we have a lot of loopholes which are relevant. At the same time, we are still having no international agreement on the alignment of AI and related technologies when it comes to international humanitarian law. We still have basically some sort of fragmented international policy landscape, which is strongly dominated by perspectives in the West, OECD, for instance, but also the Council of Europe or the European Union, which have been very influential. But at the same time, we don't have instruments that also incorporate concerns that have been raised in the global South or global majority countries. Particularly the African Union as a stakeholder is increasingly positioning itself in this field, but it hasn't been integrated yet in international frameworks. So this is already a major point, but the most important aspect, which is basically a driving factor for the need of international alignment on this, is that we lack agreement on transnational AI harms and also the regulation of activities of multinationals in the space. Well, we are able to draw borders in the physical realm by basically having some kind of border fences or whatever, but when it comes to the online space, we are not able to prevent basically harm which is attributable to one party basically from becoming relevant to other countries as well. And this is a major issue and involves many different use cases of AI, particularly social media, but also cyber attacks, for instance, are relevant in that. So what we are seeing is that on a global level, while we see certain approaches on the UN level to tackle that, for instance, the UNESCO recommendation on ethics of artificial intelligence, that we don't really see a binding instruments, which basically, as other human rights conventions did in the past, is able to recreate human rights protection in the age of artificial intelligence. So in that sense, we see that the human rights challenge associated with AI is real. It is affecting different social spheres such as health, public administration, education, rental markets, and accordingly, housing prices. We already see that certain harms are taking place, biases in food distribution systems, the energy and water use of LLMs is increasingly challenged, the use of lethal autonomous weapons. We have a stronger conversation on behavioral and psychological effects of AI, which are not still reflected in legal frameworks in the EU or other places in the world. And we see right now also with the contested policy landscape around AI regulation, an increased amount of polarization when it comes to how to regulate AI in itself. So in that sense, we see that we have a strong need to do that, but it is increasingly fragmented. And for us, there is the major point that if we don't engage in a global consensus building around AI, that we might miss this very important opportunity. And this brings me basically to the process of how we started thinking about a convention. And Caitlin, please take over this part and explain the role of the Institute in this context.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, and thank you all for allowing us to join this conversation today. I'm sorry we couldn't be there. So Alex very rightly has pointed out the governance gaps and the need for a more unified approach to the impacts of AI on human rights. From this idea, we wanted to approach kind of the solutions to this, thinking about how we move from the gaps that we've seen, both in terms of participation and inclusiveness, in terms of the factors we think are being overlooked, and how AI is impacting the human rights space. And our idea was to bring together a group, interdisciplinary and diverse group of stakeholders to really bring forth this dialogue to the next level and resulting in tangible document that introduces this concept. So moving just from dialogue and conversation to something that really can be shared and promoted throughout different governance spaces and policy conversations. So starting from the need from this dialogue, we organized a International AI and Human Rights Summit, which took place in Munich in July of 2024, hence the Munich Convention. Through a call for interest, we recruited people from all around the world, from civil society, academia, as well as private companies and people more in the governance space. 50 experts joined us in Munich for this international summit to debate this topic in different smaller working groups over the course of a day and contribute to what then resulted in the draft Munich Convention, as well as following up with a white paper on promoting and advancing human rights in the global AI ecosystem, which really outlined in a comprehensive way and detailed way the need for such a framework as the Munich Convention under international law. So moving from this kind of brainstorming event that brought together this diverse group, which we thought was clearly needed in this space, given, as Alex said, the dominance of a few actors in a few regions that have so far brought this topic to the table, we then moved the conversation to an official side event at the Human Rights Council in Geneva earlier this year in their last session, where we featured the convention and its goals, as well as representatives like Ambassador Ka from the Gambia, and also Nicole Manger from the German Federal Foreign Office. So bringing together both voices in academia, again, civil society voices, represented in Geneva, as well as these kind of political governance voices, all calling for the need for some response to this and basing our results around what had already been discussed in the Munich Convention. More recently, we then initiated a North-South policy dialogue on the UN Convention on AI Data and Human Rights, which took place in South Africa at Stellenbosch University, and a big thanks to our co-host there who helped organize this, because we see the next steps is really increasing this inclusion and participation process and taking these conversations to different locations, both physically and from a topical standpoint, in order to increase kind of the perspectives bringing into this conversation. Because every time we have one, we really learn new things and things that may be overlooked or maybe need to be incorporated. And that's why we still talk about the draft of the Munich Convention and the process we're going through. Some key points of the convention are the purpose to prevent AI-induced human rights violations as an overarching goal, but also thinking about the definitions of AI, data, and human rights, and areas critical for the enjoyment of human rights. How do we gain a common understanding of what we're all talking about together? And this is a complicated space as well. Definitions of high-risk areas and prohibited practices, the prevention of atrocities through AI use, for example, and identifying those clear kind of red line spaces. Existential risks associated with frontier technologies, such as neurotechnologies and these high-risk areas. A focus on transnational human rights impact, as well as business and human rights framework. So what is the role for actors outside of the state in this space as well? And the institutionalization and governance mechanisms for enforcing the convention's provisions, which is a complicated space, but needs a dialogue around it to find solutions. And a wider focus on protected groups, including indigenous communities, ethnic minorities, as well as the environmental impacts and the environment as a stakeholder here as well. I'll pass it back over to Alex to wrap up our conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Caitlin, for basically this very detailed summary and also inside look within the process of the ideation of the convention. We basically have already planted the seed that human rights is something relevant to be considered within AI, and particularly AI ethics. And what we are seeing right now that the way ahead is increasingly difficult because we have, as mentioned before, an increased level of polarization. So from our perspective of carrying on the work that we have already done, there are certain decisions, but also pathways that we are considering. When we look into the status quo of the AI and human rights ecosystem, we can basically see a very particular picture, which is in a way controversial or has two opposed tendencies. We see that we have significant disruptions in the AI ecosystem post Trump's election victory, but also changed regulation in other countries. And we witness also within the European Union a downscaling of AI regulatory frameworks and funding crisis. So what we can basically see is that we have some sort of AI ethics autumn or winter, which is going on currently. But at the same time, when we look at the international policy landscape, we see that there is a rising global endorsement of human rights principles as underlying pillar of AI governance. So this is in a way quite contradictory. On the one hand, we see there is a rising understanding of that, but the political implementation of AI and human rights is even becoming more difficult. So in our view, the most important point is right now to use the time which is ahead of us to really leverage the work that we have done for future consensus on coalition building. So what we want to do is to use the work that has been done within the Munich Convention process to really steer actively forward the debate on a UN Convention on AI and data and human rights. So this includes exploring synergies between existing approaches, such as the Council of Europe Framework Convention and also the potential UN Convention, as mutually supporting initiatives and approaches, the involvement of relevant policy actors, including KDAP, Women in AI, UNESCO, UNITU, OECD, and also coalition building among regions that are in general friendly towards the human rights approach. And here we see the African Union, but also Latin America and Europe as regions that are very open to that have distinct human rights traditions, but believe in the need to regulate AI within this premise, as well as particular countries such as South Africa, Brazil, or Ireland that have historically had a bridging function between different continents. So one particular aim that we are looking for is to have an event in New York to discuss the design of binding rules in the AI context, and also seeking state endorsement for a discussion on a UN convention. So it's not just about the Munich Convention, but also seeing that as an inspiration, which is very concrete, that shows that it is possible to have a UN convention with certain design features that address pertinent issues within the AI and human rights space. So what are basically concrete action points on our end as well? Also the debate on operationalization. In AI ethics, a lot of principles have remained abstract, but it's also about to operationalize them, which is why the business and human rights discourse, the UN guiding principles on business and human rights are so important, because they have pushed for the operationalization of human rights within the business context of enterprises. So here we see the need for a taxonomy on AI and human rights that details on how those things actually can work and what kind of concepts are important, such as proportionality, high risk definition, prohibited practices, to make it more tangible for companies to understand what they actually would need to do, as well as enhancing awareness regarding the human rights implications of AI development and deployment. So our need, or our work also is looking to raise the awareness of the topic, and I would say the problem statement, which we have identified within the work of the last year, in fact. So the long-term aim for us remains that we are looking forward for a convention ratification in the next 5 to 10 years, but what we are trying is to build momentum around that and leveraging the work that we have already done in Munich. And that being said, we are very happy to engage in discussions with you, but also to learn more about your perspectives on a potential convention. And yeah, please feel free to reach out either to Caitlin or me about a convention, and we are very happy to keep in touch with you. Caitlin, if you have some fun words, please, over to you.
No, just thank you all very much for having us, and we look forward to hearing from you. As Alex said, please reach out through our respective websites and other channels. Thank you again.
So now we are really in the world of human rights, really in the UN world, very deeply into the UN world here with this here. I want to say I participated in the process that they were in, and Alexander and Caitlin were amazingly open to suggestions and revisions, and they really changed the documents from the beginning all the way through. They really listened and they took on advice, not too much of mine, thank goodness, but they took on advice, and they really came up with some really good documents. So if you want to get in touch with them, and it's really worth getting in touch, you can let me know, and I'll put you in touch with them directly so you can talk to them there. They have 2 papers, as you can see. They had a draft convention, which they took to the United Nations Human Rights Council. It was a very good meeting they had there. I was able to go to, and it was very well received. In fact, the room was full. It was a side event, but it was very well received, and the room was full. They want to push the convention. I suggest that they go for resolution, because it's an easier task than a convention is a really tough one to go through. I don't know if they could get it. But But they have a very clear thing. Both of them, as you could probably understand, is they're both in international law at the Technical University of Munich. The white paper is an extraordinary paper. It's like a really solid, well-researched paper with fantastic references, really well written. And I'd recommend it to all of you if you're interested in human rights and something with regard to AI. That is a really solid place to go to as well. Any thoughts?
How will you detect violations of human rights? It's possible. It is possible to establish some processes.
Let me ask something different. Because nobody's helping me or helping you. What are human rights?
It is broader. What is a right of human? GDPR, for example, violations of this. How to say? It is possible in AI, for example, if you ask something about me, there is a lot of wrong facts about me inside that. But we need some mechanism for detection. It is not only that someone go to court.
Use the microphone.
It is not only that someone will go to the court and maybe prosecute ChatGPT or
Okay.
other.
Okay. Let's start here. Okay. This is all you're going to get of my presentation because of the time, maybe. But it's really Caitlin and Alexander who started me thinking down this road, and it comes back to what Shyamo said in the very beginning. It's about sovereignty. Okay. Now, if you look at the UN Charter, right, which is where Caitlin and Alexander are situating themselves, they're situating themselves inside of the global government system that exists today in the world, right? And they're situating themselves very clearly inside of that thing, both with the convention and particularly with human rights, okay? But sovereignty is the underlying thing. And we know that because also all of us here are involved with open science, right? And we're all struggling with this idea of sovereignty over data, which so many different instances want to claim, okay? So let's understand this idea of sovereignty from a UN international law perspective, which is the perspective that Caitlin and Alexander gave us. So what are they thinking? What's in the background there, right? Well, if you look at the UN Charter, which is, so the United Nations is a treaty organization. Fundamental thing about the United Nations is the member states do not, I repeat, do not give up their sovereignty, AI or not, okay? They're not giving up their sovereignty. So if you look at the UN Charter, I think it's in the first sentence either, the whole idea of the UN Charter is to protect the sovereignty of the states. That's the role of the UN, is to protect the sovereignty of the states. That's its sole role. And anytime you see the UN making a decision, it's always in the context of the sovereignty of the states, right? Now, where does human rights come from? Well, let's go back easy. Where does the sovereignty of the states come from? Why is Australia a sovereign state? Why is the UK a sovereign state? Why is Belgium a sovereign state? That's a good question. That's a very good question. Try to figure that one out. Where does the sovereignty come from? That's also in the first paragraph of the UN Convention. of the UN Charter. The sovereignty comes from the people. It's assumed. In other words, the state doesn't have its sovereignty on its own, it's the people. So the people are the foundation for the state, right? So the people are sovereign. They are the first instance of sovereignty. And because they choose their government, their form of government, we can say, that government then represents the people and has sovereignty. But who else has sovereignty in the United Nations? You said it, the GDPR. The individual, the person. And where do we see that? In the United Nations, the sovereignty of the individual. Human rights. And where is that in the UN? Where do you find human rights in the UN? 1948, the on human rights. The what? Declaration on Human Rights, right? Declaration, though, is a much weaker legal instrument than the Charter. What are human rights? Human rights are the limitation of the sovereignty of the state on the sovereignty of the individual. So when we talk about data sovereignty and AI and all of this, we are talking about a very complex, legal, legitimate system of relationships between people, states, and individuals, all of whom have a legitimate legal claim on sovereignty. They all have a legitimate claim on sovereignty. And that's what Alexander and Caitlin are doing in their convention, is they're trying to establish the claim for the individuals, because it's human rights, the claim for the individual with regard to sovereignty over, let's say, the impact or the use of AI. Now, just one, this is a side thing, but open science. Where does open science fit in this? Because we have to understand this. For open science to gain a foothold in society, to have a legitimate place, legal place in society, it means it has to have a claim to sovereignty. And open science is a claim to sovereignty. It must be a claim to sovereignty. If it's not a claim to sovereignty, then all of us will not be able to participate in the discussion on the legitimate place of science in society. It has to have a legal framework. But what we claim with regard to open science is it's not the sovereignty of the people, although we see that. Shyamo felt that, okay? We see that. Sovereignty of the people are there. Indigenous people, African people, Belgian people, whatever it is. The Belgians are never going to give their data to the Dutch people. You forget it. It ain't happening, okay? It just ain't going to happen, okay? So we don't do that, right? Because we have a sovereign claim. We created that data. It's our resource and so forth. We're not giving it away. So people make a claim to it. Governments make a claim. They make a claim to a lot of things, taxes and so forth, but also to data, because they see it as a resource, as a value, and it's something that their society generates. So they have a legitimate claim to it. And individuals have a legitimate claim to GDPR or something else. You can pick it out, right? What's the claim then? And this is what we have to make this argument. Because if we don't make this argument about the sovereignty of open science, we will not be able to defend open science in our societies.
So what's the claim that open science is making? I suggest it's none of the above. I suggest it's a sovereign claim like we make with regard to the oceans, or with regard to the Antarctic or the Arctic, or with regard to space, or something like that. It's a claim that this is something that belongs to humanity. It belongs to us as people. That's the claim that open science is making. That's no different in a certain sense than the claim that science itself makes. There's almost no difference really between science and open science. We don't need to say open science, we can say science, and we have said open science in a way. We just want to emphasize, when we say open science, all we're saying is we're making a sovereign claim. And if we make that sovereign claim, if we put up here number 4, open science, then we can sit in a room and discuss with the European Commission, discuss with our governments, where open science fits with all of these other, and don't forget it, legitimate claims to sovereignty. That's all I know.
UDHR, there is actually one sentence. In UNDHR, actually, there is a claim that it is a human right to be able to participate in science. So that is where the conversation can also happen. As you said, science and open science are basically at the same sides, or on the same side.
It's a good point you make. It's a very good point, yeah. And we often, we talk about the freedom of the scientist and so forth as a fundamental freedom, and all the people always talk about that, right? And we have to make those links. We have to, because we do, if we're going to live in society, whatever society we live in, we have to live within a kind of rules-based or organized society where you can get along with one another as much as possible anyway. And everybody gets their proper place, their proper claim, and as Mark says, their proper responsibility. Yes?
Whatever you said, it makes, because I can't, my personal opinion is it makes a lot of sense. One thing I would notice, what you said is more about data, it's not about AI. Open science is a bigger fish. AI use open science data, but open science is right, we get the concept, because if you are talking about data sovereignty in the care principle, you have to balance it with another right, which is the individual right. But again, this is a question of data. It's not a question of AI. That's the only thing I want to say.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. Because as Thomas says, it's a tool, right? So it's no stuff. There's nothing there. I mean, even data is a bit strange thing, but there's something there about which we can make a claim. With regard to AI, we cannot really make that claim. That's where we come back to what Shyama said at the very end, too. I think where these claims are going to be made and how they're going to be made. But be careful. There's also a claim on knowledge, right? So it's not by accident, for example, that every country has a national library, right? Because knowledge is a power, right? If you watch, like, I follow the European Commission, if I follow that, they are really heavily invested in the creation of knowledge. They'll call it innovation, G20 calls it innovation or something like that, but they're really heavily invested in that. So yeah, and IP then, all this kinds of stuff gets mixed in there, yeah. Please.
Thank you. I'll be quick. So I came to this conversation quite fresh, I suppose. I didn't know about the background of this presentation, but my research is in freedom of access to information and technology regulation. So the classic legal question is always, what is genuinely new or different about a particular technology that would warrant the need for more legislation? So it's great that they're exploring this, but I will just point out, because it comes back to what are we talking about here? So I'd be really curious to hear, there's not time now, but what is not captured in the Ruggie principles, the UN guiding principles, that can actually address a lot of these new challenges. And I will point out that, you know, we're still fighting for access to information because not every country in the world has a national library. So we're still fighting for that in many, many different places. To your point about social justice as well, information and knowledge is so highly contested, and that's where I'd like to see the conversation go. Thank you.
Just to close, I want to come back to Daisy. Daisy, did we get to circle around here, and what are we still missing? What is it that we still need to think about when we're leaving the room and we want to go forward?
I think from my side, we have to be careful of just taking over and not analyzing what it means for different nations and different regions. Because we've passed the stage where we just consume and accept anything, and that's why we're looking back into decolonizing what we have and also trying to ensure that we address issues around access and access for whom.
So Daisy, if I understand you right, you're saying one size doesn't fit all.
No.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So,
That's a librarian speaking.
yeah, a very good record. But apparently, place of knowledge, right? Place of wisdom and understanding. What? So let me ask a really difficult question. What's to you? Sorry. What role now should the UN be playing here? And what roles do we need to play outside or alongside the UN, or outside alongside the European Commission, outside alongside the African Union? What roles do we need to play in order to, and I was thinking of you when he talked about humanity in the very beginning, Alex talked about that. What roles do we need to play in order to make sure that it's not just human in the loop? It's not just AI as exterior to the environment, but AI is now in the environment, right? Data is now in the environment. So how do we manage this one size doesn't fit all?
It's a difficult one because if we try and push issues around sovereignty around what we think needs to happen, and we are forgetting about the marginalized. And that's where the challenge is. It's a thin line, and we can't shy away with AI. That's why I'm saying for whom and for, what's the purpose? Because whether we like it or not, it is there and it's going to transcend, like we have done before with the floppy disks, stiffy drives, and if you go in retirement, you come and dump your stuff with us, and we say, what do we do with that? It's the similar situation that we're dealing with. And it goes back to the issue about where do we store this? The question that was raised earlier about all those things here. So it's not an easy thing to transverse, but we need to be aware that whatever comes, it needs to be bottom up, fed. Yeah.
Dr. Sciammo, are you happy? So I think on behalf of everybody, we want to thank you and Drs. Caitlin and Alexander for launching us on such a good discussion. And thank you very much. And we've had food for the mind, food for the soul, and then we need food for the body, I think, yeah.